chatting. We'll wait for our Russian bots to come on and spam us with something, and then anyways, good morning, everybody. Lorri Lown, Coach Lorri Lown here from Team Wilpers, and joining me today is Justin Harris, and I'm super excited because Justin and I have never talked. We were just having a very good conversation, first about science and then about history, and Justin's a really smart guy. I've been following him on social media for a while, and he's a very curious person. I think that's really an interesting aspect in being a coach. And he has a great newsletter. We'll drop the link for you if you're interested. And hey, Val and Oliver, I got all your questions. Thank you. We will address those a little bit later. And yeah, yeah. So we've had a few conversations on Instagram and email and that kind of thing, but today's the first day we get to sit and chat. So welcome. I'm very excited you said yes to be here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I like what you guys are doing over here on
Oh,
this
yeah.
side of Team Wilpers, and I'm excited for the conversation.
Yeah. So tell us your story. Let's start with that.
Oh man, as my clients know, I'm a talker, so I'll try to keep it short and sweet. Grew up like just into everything, sports, being outside, different stuff like that. Funny enough, my number one passion has always been my bicycle. I learned how to ride at 3 years old. I had like a 6 year old friend who was like riding a two-wheeler. My aunt and uncle came home, and I was like with a hammer, like trying to knock off the training wheels because I wanted to be like the cool kids. And they're like, "You're not ready," and I'm like, "But Nikki's
Yes, I
doing
am.
it." And they took them off and pushed me, and I was gone. And there's a picture. I mean, I'm like the bike, and I'm like so little, but
Yeah.
I've always been into cycling more than anything. I got into was soccer, baseball, like everything. A lot of pond hockey, a lot of street hockey, a lot of basketball, pickup games, kill the carrier, like still to
Helicarrier?
this day. Oh yeah, so you like throw the ball. Whoever has the ball, everyone's got to tackle them. Probably, like it's probably a name
A
that
boy
is
sport.
yeah. It's just kids just trying to beat each other up in friendly ways. That no, this is really a game, mom. Like we all play it all the time. No, but couldn't sit still. My mom's like, you just like you would get out of the car and run circles around the car, and so yeah. So eventually, I got to high school and stuff. My dad's like, you got to play three sports. And I'm like, no, let me just get used to high school. He's like, I stopped playing soccer for a bit. I was running and I wasn't that great. And he's like, you should do cross country. I'm like, those guys run from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock. Like, it's not happening, man. Like, and so I tried out for soccer. I didn't make the team, made it to last cuts. Coach pulled me aside. I had to ride my bike 5 miles home. He's like, here, son, come here. I want to let you know it's between you and another kid. And we had to flip a coin. It was so close and you lost. I just figured you want to know that. So my trajectory was set on a flip of a coin and off to cross country. And I was so miserable and upset, but ended up varsity and stuff. But and had a great experience with running, college, post collegiately. But cycling was always my thing. I rode a lot of miles in the off season. I didn't like not didn't like the pound into running, but I just had so much more fun riding and learned how to
Mhm.
incorporate that into my training. And my coaches were always understanding of it because like anything, if you end up performing, people let you kind of do your
Do
way.
what you want.
Well, my friends would be like, "You got to do anything you want," and I'm the oldest, and my siblings are like, "You're the king, like you get to do whatever." And I'm like, "Well, maybe it's because I like talk to people about what I want. I try to
Yeah.
communicate clearly and always I've always managed up my whole life. Who's above me? Hey, this is what I need. How can I help you? So yeah. So anyway, that's my story. I'm sticking with it, and
Yeah.
still can't sit still today. So
But you were a D1 runner.
yeah. So I was
So what
yeah
led you to running versus cycling? Or was cycling not a sport for you at that point? It was just
yeah
recreation.
yeah no cycling. So where I really was in cycling was more like like there wasn't a ton of races around,
Right.
and there were some, but it was just not what my family like. My dad played football, baseball, wrestling. We were into hiking, stuff like that, and he was a big cyclist. But he taught us how to ride our bikes on the road. At like 10, we would go ride like
Mhm.
30 miles on the road with little 24-inch mountain bikes, or we'd go into the woods and stuff. But I was really into like BMX racing. I raced a little bit, like dirt jumps, like flying through the woods on my mountain bike. Uh, and finally, I watched the 1999 Tour de France. I have mixed feelings about Lance, but what he did for a lot of people is got the U.S. into cycling, right? For
Yeah.
sure, 100%. And that's his claim to fame for me. So I remember sitting in my mom's room watching Outdoor Life Network in the 1999 tour and be like, why are these guys sprinting in the middle of the stage? What's this polka dot jersey? And like no one talking to you, nothing you can look up, but I just had to
Right.
watch it. And I got hooked from there. I told my dad, I had an injury running, and I'm like, Dad, I need a bike. Like we have a mountain bike, but like I need to get on the road. So we bought like a $600 Bianchi road bike with the worst components that I worked in like a month. Then I took his bike because it was a little bit nicer, and yeah, it was just like I would just go and try to get lost. But for running, I was fortunate to be coached by a very good coach. He explained a lot of things to us. I had a very good team. And yeah, we won a state title in cross country. I was on a national championship relay, a relay that won a national championship indoors. And then I was, yeah, between the 15th, depending on the meet, like the big state meets, I was like, let's just say I was like the 20th best runner in New York State. So I wanted to go far away. I ended up staying close because I found the right fit for me. And yeah, I ran D1 on a small scholarship. I was more of a steeplechaser, 2 mile steeplechase. And it took me a long time to identify as a runner. Like it
Hmm.
was my senior year of college. I did 5 years. I was like,
Or
I'm a cyclist, I'm a soccer player. I just happen to be good at running or proficient at it. And it took me a long time to because I didn't, I love to compete. I hated easy days. I hated long runs. I hated everything else other than a workout or a race.
race.
And
Yeah.
so it took me, and so I was historically undertrained. I did low volume, and I would always get hurt. And then I would go to the bike. I get hurt. I'd go to
Yeah.
the bike, and I'd sweat it out on the indoor bike. Or my coach would be like, "Hey, take your bike, go for long rides. Like, just like be right. Like do what you can." And so, um, yeah. And then I think my sophomore year of college, friend signed us up for a triathlon, and I did the Mighty Montauk, which is like a point-to-point race. And
Yeah.
I I have a story on that. It was the craziest story to be introduced to triathlon. But let's just say I had a flat tire for 11 of the 14 miles, and I only got passed by two guys. I passed one guy back on a flat tire on the rim, and so I didn't do well in the race, but it left a little taste in my mouth
Yeah.
go pursue it after college. I moved to Hawaii, taught high school in Hawaii for a year, and I got into triathlons out there more. And then I'm like, let's move back home and try to see if
Yeah.
I can. At the time, I was seeing if I could try like qualify for the Olympic trials. I thought it was like running where you do a time, but triathlon's not
Hmm.
like that. You got to get invited to the events and the
Well,
Wasser
and at that
method.
time there weren't triathlon in the Olympics, right?
It was just starting. So it
Okay.
was, this was, so it came in 2000. And then when I decided was like 2008, like I saw the Olympics coming up. So I was like, okay, 2012, I'd like to do the Olympic trials in triathlon, not knowing anything. But so I did a little non-draft. I did one drafting race. They told me I wasn't fast enough swimmer, and so I got kicked out of the pool of Olympic hopefuls. And then I focused on non-drafting and raced a couple years professionally. So
There you
kind
go.
of a little all over the place,
And
athletic.
you grew up in upstate New York.
Yep, yep, yeah. So not too far from New York City, kind of in between New York
Yeah.
City and Albany.
Yeah, we don't call that upstate. I grew up in the real upstate.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know. I didn't want to call you out on saying it upstate. It's a little point of contention for us. Like upstate is so much further than 90
Yeah.
minutes,
Yeah.
the egocentrism of New York City. But,
It's all good.
no, yeah. So, but where I grew up, I mean, you could get into some smaller mountains, riding and running. There's a lot of like interesting races in the New Paltz area that I heard
Yeah.
about as a kid growing up, like the Schwanga, survival of the Schwanga SOS, which is like kind of more of a survival race than it is the triathlon.
Isn't
Um,
that one of the Wassner sisters'
yes, yeah, yes, yeah. Well,
capstone right? That's
both of
her.
them, yeah. Now both have done. Both of them have won it now, and it's pretty cool to see that. I won it back in 2010. And so it's an awesome local race that has like kind
Yeah.
of a folklore around it, and all the locals do it, which is kind of cool. But
Wait a minute. Is this the race where you have to swim with your running shoes?
yeah, so you bike
Okay.
30 miles and 5 miles up the mountain. And at that point, the rest of the race, whatever you're going to swim in or run with, you have to carry. And so if you're going to wear a wetsuit in the water, you have to carry it on 18 or 21 miles of running, like through the mountains. And it's carriage trail, so it's not single track. But And then whatever you run with, you got to swim with. So you got to swim with your shoes. You got to find places to put them. So there's all these like unique strategies. It's kind of like bike packing. It's like everyone has their own setup. Of what do they go light and fast or carry everything and survive it. So it's a really interesting event. But in this area, we get a little bit of everything. We got farmlands. We got a lot of backcountry roads, some dirt roads, which I grew up hunting for dirt roads on my road bike, and now that I love gravel, it's like kind of it seems funny. It's like I used to ride it on 21 millimeter
Right.
tires, and bomb down them and look for them. And now it's like it's not a gravel bike unless it's got basically mountain bike tires. So
Right. Well, I
whatever.
just put 50s on my gravel bike, which
I
is
was just gonna
so
say
fun. But
I
I
had
started
50s
riding
on
road
mine.
with
Yeah,
19s. We ran 19s, we ran tubulars, and
yep. More
just for training.
aerodynamic, right?
Yeah, it
Like
was like the
little
size of
little
my
guys.
pinky.
You pump them to well, if they're tubulars, what 200, 190
Oh, yeah.
psi, like
Yeah, it was
something.
crazy.
So
It was
yeah,
crazy. We've
but
come a
then you
long
start,
way.
yeah, but you start learning, right? Like if you're in anything long enough, you start realizing, like, okay, this is what people say to do, right?
Hmm.
Like I should do this, and we also do this. Not like we always reverse engineer from the elites and anything in facet of life. If we're in this industry, what do the elite, the best in the world do, and then we reverse engineer it down. And not everything trickles down
No.
all the time, right? And so, I remember putting some training tires on, like I moved up to 23s, and then, like I would get lazy and not want to, I'd ride my bike most days, but you don't want to pump them up every day, like, the pump out, where's the pump. And, all right, so they deflate a little bit, and you're like,
Oh,
wow,
this is better.
like it's a little bit more comfortable. And then
Yeah,
you put the pump on, and it's like instead of 120 psi, it's 90, and you're like,
that makes sense.
okay, and after a couple of years, you're like, well, why don't I just leave it here for training, and then racing, I'll pump them up, and then you get into racing, you're just like,
Yeah.
getting shaken up. So anyway, yeah,
Like slamming your stem, right? Not for everybody. As a bike shooter,
never
I can
could do
tell
it.
you, don't come to me
Yeah,
and tell me to slam your stem. It's probably
yeah.
not the
My
right
friends
place
are
for you.
like that. They're just like slam it, and I'm like,
Yeah,
I'm not
no.
powerful. I can't get in that position, and I can't like stay low in that position.
Right.
So, I'll be a sail up top, but like if I'm powering away from you, like
Exactly.
have fun with your
I know.
slams. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I was reading your bio, and one thing jumped out at me, which is you've also coached for bobsled, skeleton, and luge. Where did that come from?
Yeah. So, uh, yeah. So, one of my philosophies, like so I always wanted to be. I think when I was like somewhere in high school, realizing like I had really good influences of coaches. Like my
Hmm.
father was a great coach, to me, like, pushing us, but also encouraging us and making things fun. Anytime he took over, like coaching my T-ball team or soccer team, like he always said, your teams were never that good, but everyone like worked as hard as they could and acted as a team. And therefore we'd always like kind of challenge some better teams. Like we were the
Hmm.
scrappy, like the little giants, like, the scrappy little guys, but we just didn't give up, right? And he would encourage that. And then in high school, I had a very good coach. In college, I had a good coach. And my high school coach would try to teach us. I was an underclassman, like all the good guys were seniors. And when they graduated, our philosophy with those guys were like, whatever the second to last, the penultimate interval is, you give it everything. And then the last
Hmm.
one is all guts. And so we turned into very good racers. But I remember when those guys graduated, my coach came to us, me and one other younger classman who was one of the best runners in the state. He ran for Stanford. He was a national champion at Stanford in cross country. Very good runner. He's like, hey, look, I've been trying to do this thing called threshold, you know, and whatever. So I had some good coaches. So I knew I wanted to coach. I started in teaching. But when I started coaching and teaching, I was like, I want to be able, like, I went to school to teach regular and special ed. So,
Hmm.
my thing was always about working with everyone. Like, I wanted to be able to work with if you come to me, Lori, like, I want to find some way to, like, help you. I might not be the
Hmm.
best in this domain or that domain. It's kind of like good coaches and practitioners, I think, are like jack of all trades, right?
Oh, yeah.
Uh,
And good teachers. I really believe a teacher is not necessarily the best athlete. A teacher is a teacher, and you
yeah,
can give them different material and they'll be able to teach it. I've taught theater at a university for 9 years.
yeah,
I taught for the Red Cross. I taught for Girl Scouts. I teach
yeah,
as a coach. I'm a
yeah,
teacher. Even though
yeah.
when I went to college, I didn't want to be a teacher. So I got out of that. But
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
it's
exactly,
funny
right.
how things change.
Well, my parents were like, "Hey, you should be a teacher, right? Like, you should be a
Hmm.
teacher." My mom drove school buses, and my dad was like really big. I'm the oldest. You're going to college. They didn't go to college, so and they fought really hard for us to like have good educations and take it seriously. And it was like sport in school, sport. And it's like there's no difference. Like take it seriously. So anyway, so I started in endurance coaching. Like I was an endurance athlete, and I found that like I was always bothered by like, okay, the fastest guy is the captain.
Right.
They're not the best. They're not always the best captain, like, and I would have conversations with some of my coaches sometimes. I'm like, they're not really inspiring, and they only kind of whatever it was. Like everyone's a little bit different, right? And so yeah, long story short, I got into triathlon, so I had to learn cycling and swimming, and like, how do you get all these things into 1 week? And then I started coaching some other people in college, and some adults, and so I was always kind of like people were like, "Hey, like, can you coach me in this?" And I'm like, "I don't coach triathlon. Like, I'm figuring this thing out." And this one guy was super persistent. He's like, "You're faster than me. You're a nice guy. Like, you're coaching me." I'm like, "What? What do you mean I'm coaching?" No, I told him no like 3 times, and finally he's like, "Here's 150 bucks a month. And I had no money at the time. And I was just like, all right, well, he's like, we'll figure it out together. He was super awesome. And he was actually a rock star. He was in Murphy's Law that performed with the
Oh, no
Beastie
way.
Boys on their tour. Yeah. So he was like a really interesting character. And yeah, no, he taught me a lot. And so long story short, I get to coaching sprinters and jumpers, hurdlers, like speed and power athletes. Because again, I wanted to be able to coach everything in running at first, and then I got into like lifting. And finally you get to this place where it's like, okay, like I can go to conferences or I can read books, but like this is not the same as like following a coach or
Hmm.
seeing what's going on. And so I heard this guy talk at a conference. I never heard of him. He was talking about bobsled and working with Lolo Jones and some Olympians. And he was up in Lake Placid. I'm like, that's not too far away. So I look him up. I find his PhD, 170 pages. I read it, and it was on developing Olympic level coaches. And he
Ah,
put it into 4 paradigms. Like you have your teachers, you have your scientists, you have your like motivators, and I forget what the third one is. So I emailed him using his PhD. Hey, I'd like to coach, like be a coach the best I can. I don't know at the Olympic level. I feel like there's not a lot of opportunities for this. Can I come and watch a practice a week? Like I will make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I will. It was a cold call, cold email.
yeah.
I'll hold timers, clipboards, move whatever you want me to do. Hear nothing for a month. So finally, it's like June. I'm like, stuff's like okay. Like one last email. He's like, I'm leaving. The guy who's here needs another coach. Contact him. I contact him. I had a heartbeat. I think that's really what it was. So I go up
Yeah.
there to help coach their sprints and jumps. I've only been coaching sprinters for a year and a half, 2 years. So they basically everyone was like, no one's going to listen to you. Like they don't know you. You don't have the right pedigree. All this stuff. And the one guy who's like, I need help. Let's make it work. And so I just took my time. I watched a lot. I asked a lot of questions. I took video. I saved all the files. I still have them
Yeah.
to this day. And I ended up doing my master's thesis on the sprint skeleton start. So they how they put their feet and all this stuff, it just didn't. It was like, why don't we look at track and field, who has like thousands of publications, thousands, millions of
Right.
people doing it? Like, let's reverse engineer from there. And they were more taking the bobsled approach. And so I got in with them. I worked some World Cups. I did a little bit of research with them. I helped create manuals for them. I worked Olympic test event in Korea. And I was kind of on that trajectory, and they kind of failed to hire me 2 times. And I was kind of
Oh,
like, you know what? I'm gonna kind of move on from here. So, yeah, scrawny guy, distance guy, working with like some of the strongest athletes in the world. And but the biggest compliment was the one who oversaw all Winter Olympic sports said to me, he's like, I came into this facility and was ready to hear like nothing but complaints about you for some reason, and all I heard was like, "How do we hire this guy?" Like,
yeah.
and all I did was just try to connect with people, like a gold medalist. How am I going to tell him in a sport I don't know what to change? It took me 7 weeks before I said anything to him.
Yeah.
Finally, I said X, and he was like, "How'd you see that?" And I was like, "Well, I've been seeing
That's
it
what
for a
I do.
while, and I waited, And he's like, "I really appreciate it." Even
Yeah.
some other people were like, you held your space. You didn't come in with ego. You didn't try to like do something, and in
Hmm.
turn, you observed a lot. And so, yeah, it was really interesting. I worked with the like kind of sensor processing stuff, and yeah, that's how I got into bobsled and skeleton. So
Larry, that's one of our
wild.
other
Would have never guessed that.
questions.
What?
So, oh, Larry's asking a question. We're going to ask that. It's on my list.
Mhm.
but anyways, it's very interesting with USOC, United States Olympic Committee, and that's the governing body of all the Olympic national governing bodies.
Yeah.
And there's an awful lot of politics in that organization, just like,
Yeah.
USAC and whatever. And a lot of times it is, I knew this person, I worked with this person, and or I owe this person a favor because I dated his sister in high school or whatever.
Yeah, I got
I went through
overlooked.
a very similar struggle when I became a coach.
Yeah.
I had never raced a bike.
Yeah.
I was a recreational rider who loved to teach, and it changed my life. And I went back to school and studied. And I had already had 2 careers, which was interesting at my young age. And a lot of people didn't take me seriously at first. It was like, how can you be a coach if you weren't a racer? And it took a while. I went on to be the president of the race association, and I promoted a race for 10 years and coached some awesome athletes and some national champions and
Yeah.
had an amazing race team. But even my own coach, the first time I had a coach, said, "Who would want to race for you? You're nobody." And I'm like, "Well, watch me." And we're still doing our thing
Yeah,
25
I had
years
this.
later. So
Yeah, when I shifted to coaching sprinter, like speed and power athletes from being a distance coach, I had several kids. It was a pretty elite academic institution, so a
yeah,
little bit of we know we know better, like the kids. And I'm like, I remember getting asked like how does a distance coach speed and power athletes? And I
right,
was just like, judge me at the end of the season. We'll see, right? And
yeah,
4 years later, 3 years later, have the first All American in track at the institution, and then another year, the first national champion in the 400 in the school history athletically, and then a decathlon All American, which I think
hmm
shows like okay, you kind of have a grasp of all the events and can
right,
do. And a school that didn't have indoor track, which if you know anything about running, it's like not having those facilities, not having that program and opportunity to compete, and then
right,
it's like you get to spring track and like everyone's got like a mile head start on you, and so, but for me in coaching. And I think I see it with you and a lot of our team Wilpers coaches. It's really about like creating like a system, right? Like like a structure, in a kind of an ecosystem. And one of the challenges that happens is like, oh, I read like Sally's doing this workout, like, and now I want to do this workout, and
hmm
Jimbo is doing like this thing. Now I want, and it's like you're getting pulled in a lot of different directions. Like I want high intensity, I want power zone
right,
only, and it's like, well, and we could talk about it, but like we end up doing a little bit, we get pulled in a lot of directions because we want to have fun, and we think like in order to get better we have to suffer all the time, and
right,
like physically. And I find that like I've had the most success with clients of kind of pulling back the reins and saying like, hey, like embrace the suck, and that's not really the hard work, it's actually the easier work, and like committing to the process to like chip away at this. So just as I
hmm
asked my clients doing that, in coaching education and stuff, it's like you can't stop learning. You got to look to different domains. Like,
yep,
I remember when I started getting into more like finance and business reading and those metaphors that go there, like it just starts like opening different ideas, right? But you have to remember reading this one time, like Alexander McQueen exhibit, like a fashion designer designed like Lady Gaga's like meat dress and stuff. I had an ex buy me like things for my birthday, and we went and saw Florence and Machines, which is not my style of music, and we were going to the Met fashion exhibit for Alexander McQueen. I'm like, whose birthday is this for? But as I tend to do, I try to like, okay, be open minded. Maybe I'll see some. And the first quote on the wall, Alexander McQueen's, it was a quote from him. Is like because he was a trained tailor in London, so he understand how to make garments and the tradition of making
hmm
garments. And he said you have to understand tradition in order to break history, like type thing. And I'm paraphrasing, right? But like I break rules all the time in my
yeah,
coaching, but I know why I'm breaking them, and then how to like make sure we don't like make a mistake and correct for them on the next week or the next block, right? So who's to say a certain type of person is not capable of doing that, right?
right,
Like some of the best distance coaches never ran distance in their life. Some of the best sprint coaches in the world aren't sprinters, right?
right.
So this over validation of like, um, experience doesn't mean wisdom. I'll say that.
No, and I can tell you, there's a lot of ex-pro bike racers who make terrible coaches.
Yeah.
So they know how to do what they did, but they can't apply the science to
I
others.
don't coach people the way I was worked for me.
Right. Well,
That's
I have a
not my
question for
job.
you. Do you have a
What?
coach? Do you have a coach?
I don't have a coach currently, but I had a coach. now it's 2 years ago.
Okay.
I worked with Rory Sutherland
Oh yeah.
for 6 months for dual purpose. One, a little bit more professional development of coaching with power.
Right.
Understand it. I've done it myself, but it's always like just a little different take. And professional development is I always see it as like I might learn something new, or it might
Mhm.
confirm the theories or
Some.
ideas that I had. And he was very much so. He's like power, like he's like I coach a lot on heart rate and effort. I'll give you power numbers, but like the sensors are not always accurate. You have to
Yeah.
calibrate them all the time outside, and FTP is not the bee's knees as we all think it is, right?
Right.
Especially for professional cycling. And what we do here, right? Like it's like Pareto's principle, like 80 20% of the stuff gives 80% yield, right? Like for FTP and stuff. I'm not trying to like say anything blasphemous. Like he just like
No,
opened my
you
eyes
can.
opened my
Because
eyes
I've
to
been trying to teach people FTP is not the be all end all. I think we're all
well,
starting to learn that. It
yeah,
is designed to give you training zones. That's really what it is.
right, because we're trying to manage stress, right?
Right.
Like when I write when we write workouts and stuff, like and we could get into this, but like when I write a workout, I'm like, okay, I'm been coaching with Lori. It takes me like 6 to 8 weeks to build a paradigm, a model in my head of what Lori's like. What's her day like? Is she an
Hmm.
over reporter or under reporter? Is she dramatic or steady? Like everyone. You start putting people in little like mailboxes. Okay,
You
this
do.
person's here, right? And not. I don't keep people in those. It's just like I'm trying to get a working model, right? Like I say, it's like my low level algorithm. It's like supercomputer, maybe not supercomputer, it's just a computer, but like I'm trying to get in as much information as I can before I start putting my foot down, right? Uh,
Hmm.
but the point is like I imagine like, okay, I want Lori to look and feel like this in the session. And then coming off the next day, I expect her to kind of maybe be a little lethargic. And so the workout is this way, right? And so we're trying to envision that, like, how long is it going to take to recover from? And when you're coaching people, even in person, but particularly remotely, is you have to make these kind of I'm really saying arbitrary bands, right? Because like, what's the difference between zone 2 and zone 3? It's not.
Right.
They're not light switches of like, okay,
Right.
all of a sudden I'm in there, right? Until we get to like, basically threshold, upper threshold LT2 into VO2
Hmm.
max, right? Like now the mitochondria is not buffering lactate. It's, the basement's filling with water, and now we're on to the next. The pumps aren't working, right? Like they're
Right.
being overworked, and so we're into the next one. That's the only one. Everything else, and then I guess like maybe neuromuscular. Like once we get over 10 seconds, we're not really in like glycolytic, like creatine phosphate. It's done,
Hmm.
right? And then we go to ATP. So there's a couple of them, but like I say, it's like if you we create these bands, but they're not like I think athletes
There's
feel
not
like
a
they're
curve between them.
yeah, exactly. I say they bleed into each other, right?
Hmm.
But
And they
you know,
vary from day to day,
day to
from
day.
morning to
So,
evening.
oh man,
If I've had a long training block or
yeah,
if I've been at rest. Yeah.
absolutely. I'm big on relative intensity. So this is like I try to keep it very like it seems complex at first for my clients, like because there's a lot of I give a lot of different cueing. So I would be like some things will be heart rate focused,
Hmm.
and I'm like, don't worry about power or pace, running pace. Like, it's like, but it's so slow or low. And it's like, it's
Yeah.
okay. Right. Then
Yeah.
I'll give them like a pace power workout. And they're like, but my heart rate was so high. I'm like, okay, it's secondary or tertiary, like
Hmm.
hit the velocity, right? Because VO2 max, velocity, right? That's the important thing. And then effort, right? Effort is like your perceived effort, right? And to me, I call it the triangle of, like the calibration triangle. At the top for me is effort always,
Hmm.
right? Like to calibrate, like to subjectively know like where you should be at effort, and then pace, power, and then heart rate. Because if you just go on heart rate zones, like you're gonna miss out on some stuff, right? Like it's
Definitely.
good for
Because it's
some
a
things.
trailing indicator.
Yes, pros
Yeah.
and cons, right? And I use heart rate more like, like zone 2 runs or rides as like kind of a buffer to like capture, like, I don't know what's going on in your life or whatever. Like maybe you didn't eat well, you're stressed, you didn't sleep well. Maybe you crushed that workout a little bit more than
Hmm.
you should have, but I give you the space, right? I have to give a little space. It's not rigidity. Although I would say a lot of my clients, I don't know if any are on here, probably like dictator Justin, but I'm just a dictator when it comes to like going slow, and that's what I'm being known
Right.
for now. And I'm like, no, I love like it's a privilege to get hard workouts, and I give people hard workouts, but
Right.
the message that most people need to hear is to go easier and spread things out.
Yeah.
But effort just takes so long. Like I was talking to Matt about it. Like what is that? All the coaches, we're all trying to get people to slow down, and he's like, effort's the best thing, but it takes years of like failing.
Calibration. Yeah.
Like basically going over and getting hurt or sick and then learning where that limit is. And our job as coaches is like, look, you don't need to do the same thing I did to learn. So I try to give these different focal points for
Hmm.
people. And that's where the kind of, I think sometimes the complexity adds up, is because just a different cue on something could be the difference. So
Right. Well, and that's the
being coached,
experiential learning cycle. You were talking about that in your bio too. And when I was at Syracuse, I actually spent a
yeah,
couple of semesters in an educational design program.
mhm,
And that's what they talk about, right? Experiential learning cycle. Some people learn by hearing, and some people learn by reading, and some people learn
yeah,
by doing and experiencing. And
yeah,
so we
differential
have
learning.
to, and especially if you're just getting to know someone, you have to hit all those points. Or if you
Yeah,
have a big audience, you have to
yeah.
hit all those points because not everyone will reach every person. So
Exactly. Well,
yeah,
you can't be a guru, right? Like it's like
right.
like zone 2 training. Okay, good for some, bad for others. Great for some moments, bad for other things, right? Hit high intensity.
Yeah,
Perimenopausal and menopausal women need high intensity. And I'm like, yeah, okay, yes.
yeah.
Yes,
Not
but
every day. Thank
but
you.
not every day, right?
Right. And I still need my endurance. If that's my sport, I need it.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah,
And then how are we fitting those pieces in? Like, does it always have to? Can you do strength on the bike?
right.
Yes, you have to be in the weight room as much, right? What are the goals? Like Matt says, strength, and I'm not chastising Matt at all, and it's like, yes, you need strength, but if you only have X amount of time, like you're not going to be lifting your way to a marathon or a Grand Fondo. You're going to be riding. So let's go get hill work and
Hmm.
or let's get some low cadence work on the bike to like do some strength in a sports specific way, right? And
Right.
different stuff. But yeah, I just learned this in special ed and different things. It's differential learning. Like if you ever were in class and did centers, like I'm going to watch the video and write when, then I'm going to build this thing, right? You don't know how people are going to learn, is what you're saying.
Right.
And that's why, like, going back to like me being coached, is like I've been fairly self coached for a lot of my, like, I was coached in high school, and then my college coach was more of a facilitator. He really let us pick volume. And unfortunately for my teammates, but fortunately for my coaching career, like I read Jack Daniels, I read the books, and so like freshman year, my college coach had a lot of trust, like knew that I knew what I was talking about, and we would do 1,000 repeats threshold or quarter repeats running. So whatever, by like the same two, and I'm like, coach, like, can we just mix it up a little bit? Like, what about two? I start, and he's like, that's great, we'll do that today, and all the
Yeah.
upperclassmen were like ready to choke me out, like, what's this
Yeah.
freshman? And it was a point of contention a bit, but it was like he gave me a lot of space and the other athletes like to explore a bit. And I got into Arthur Lydiard, like some other books, and certainly Alan Coogan's, training with a power meter. That was just after college. So you get into these things. So I've been self-coached, so it was really good process to be coached by Rory in that way, because I am empathetic to my clients, that like I try not to write every little thing that they're supposed to be doing every day. Like there has to be
Hmm.
some space for autonomy. Like I'm not writing your stretching, like unless I need to cue you to do a specific thing, because we all are on this journey to master like ourselves, right? And the people are getting coaching are realizing like, let's kind of speed this up. It's like, if I'm going into, I know you've been in the tech and startup world and stuff, like if I'm going there, like, am I just going to learn totally on my own? No, I'd rather go to someone and be like, okay, like mentor me, or can I
Right.
work for you, or whatever it is, which is what I did with Bobsled Skeleton. Is like, I want to do this, and I got kind of thrown in a different trajectory. So with Rory, like, just like was great because we only talked once a month, but and we're about the same age, and I know him from cycling. I watched him on TV and stuff, so it was kind of neat to experience it. But it was this really interesting part early on, was like, I don't want to be the coach that's coaching the coach, right? Like telling him
Hmm.
what to do, right? And I tell my athletes, I'm like, look, don't forget, you're paying me to tell you, like, help tell you what to do and structure your day. So if you're telling me to tell you what to do, that
Right.
sounds like a waste of your money. If you're telling, hey, move this to this day, that to that day, because if I put it here, I'm thinking about what preceded it and what's coming after, right?
Hmm.
So that process of just like kind of, seeing what the workout was, and for us, right? Like, I mean, I make a lot of decisions for a lot of people. By the time I get to myself, I'm like, I can ease my way out of a hard workout so quick.
That's why I always have a coach. Hashtag, this is why you need a coach.
Yes.
Because I have accountability and I
Yes.
am making too many decisions every day and I
Yes.
struggle with that for myself. So,
Yeah.
and then, yes, I do have input and I
Yeah.
do have the knowledge to make good decisions, but
Absolutely.
yeah, in my best
It's like
years,
with
I've been a
Matt.
coach.
Working
Yeah.
with Matt, I was
Well, and I
like,
was going to ask you about that.
does a
So, what's it like
therapist
to
need a
coach?
therapist?
Yeah.
Does a therapist need a therapist? Yeah, you need
Oh,
someone to
probably
talk
more
to.
than anyone,
Yes.
right? The plumber
But
has
they know the
leaky pipes.
language, right? They know the
Yeah.
language, and you're like, well, I don't. And so with Rory, I really just stepped back, and I was like, hey, like, and I actually got hurt early on, like, because it was a lot of intensity
Mhm.
for testing, and I tweaked my Achilles, and like I did an FTP test right before, so all my numbers went up, and I had not trained
Yeah.
at those numbers, and so I wasn't really. I made some mistakes in like kind of telling him that, and it was all hindsight, but it was. I mean, I was 39, and that was the best bike shape I was in. I got back to
Yeah.
racing Cat 3. I finished second in the state in gravel, and I finished top 6 in the road race. I sprinted a little too late, and I had wrong wheels and gearing, but nonetheless, I just
I got
waited too
boxed
late.
in and
Yeah,
no.
I
Um,
actually was. I got pushed
I
into
hate
the
when people
crowd.
say that. No, you chose the wrong line. You didn't get boxed in.
Absolutely. Oh no, yeah, no,
Take
I definitely
ownership.
chose the wrong
Yeah.
line. Everyone was over here, and then they just started coming over. I'm like, oh man, this is not worth it. And it was by
Yeah.
like a third place was like that far away. We all punched it at. I'm like, if it was 5 more meters, man, I was.
Yeah.
I'm a diesel engine. I'm not a sprinter. But
Yeah.
anyways, nonetheless, you said
Anyways, the
something
big
about Matt.
question is, what is it like to coach Matt Wilpers? And is it difficult? I'm thinking about, I know for me, right? Because I do physical work as
Oh
well.
yeah.
And is it difficult when you have someone who's teaching fitness for their job? And we're assuming he's not faking it, but maybe he is. How do you program that in? And I know sometimes he doesn't even know, what his work schedule is going to be like
Yes.
from week to week and what the class will be. And
Yeah. So coaching Matt is, it's an interesting and unique opportunity. Yeah, when you're working with someone whose job is physical, right?
yeah.
It's kind of like where we got to was like, okay, what are you getting and what are you not getting?
Hmm.
Because his schedule, he doesn't have many days of not working, right, or
Right.
teaching, right, and so it's basically two, and they're kind of back to back. So he's been focusing. We first started with triathlon, and then he's been focusing on the marathon the past year and this year as well. So it kind of is like what's the low hanging fruit, like what are the big bang for the buck things, right? And for him it was really a long run, like making sure that we're getting a consistent long run. And again, I do break rules with him, like because of his training age, his experience, his
Hmm.
execution, like he executes things very well. When I ask him to do things, like, because he knows how to do them, right, it's not his
Right.
first rodeo, so he gets a lot more leash, right, like in the sense of like, yeah, okay, like it's more like how do I say it? It's like less education, and it's
Hmm.
more like kind of be careful of these things, or
Yeah.
hey, I know, and it's more like when it's not you, you can be more objective, right? And I can zoom out and be
Hmm.
like, like I think he's like, you know, that wasn't a great run. And I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
but like last year, this time, like they really weren't great runs. Like
Right.
it's much better than this time last year, right? So if we
Yeah.
compare apples to apples, is it as good as 6 months ago when you were like right before Berlin, or, like when you PR'd by a bunch? Like, no, it's not. But there has to be this drop. And, and it's not that he doesn't know that,
Can you
right?
repeat that point again? Because I think that's another important point for our audience of how fitness is dynamic. It has to have
Yeah,
that
it's
drop.
impossible to stay up in your peak fitness at all times, right? Like no one wants to see their FTP go down. No one wants
Right.
to see the Garmin's VO2 max go down, although, that's not accurate at all. So
Right.
please ignore it. Uh, yeah, it just can't stay up there. And for someone who's like a 3 sport distance runner, right? Cross country, indoor, outdoor. So basically, out of the entire year, we're not training for like 3 to 5 weeks, depending on what, you know, take away injury. And you just realize really quickly, you can't have a good like August to November, and then a
Hmm.
good December to March, and then March to May. It just doesn't happen that way unless you are taking pockets to unload, right? And
Right.
so, as coaches, I mean, I really think of like I've given this analogy before, but like training is like being a sponge, right?
Mhm.
So a sponge, take it out of the package. That's someone who has not a lot of training age, right? They're a fresh sponge, man. And and I'm 40. I've coached clients in their 60s. They're not a fresh sponge no more, right?
Right.
A lot of hard
Thank
miles,
you.
a lot of different stuff. I didn't say you. You don't have to identify,
I know. I'll be
but
60 this year, just
oh,
saying.
excellent. Yeah,
I
and you
know.
don't look it at all.
And I'm
So,
a better athlete than I was at
oh my God.
50.
Yeah, it's like,
So,
it's like what's this phrase? It's like, wisdom is wasted on the youth, right? Like the things I did at
yes.
20 years old, like it was just silly, right? Like I
Yeah.
could, drink all night and then run a 15-mile long run and then do a workout on Monday, right? But
Right.
I see training as like a sponge, right? And so like when I think of things, it's like, it's like when you train hard, you're squeezing the sponge, right? And if every
Mhm.
day, like you're squeezing, you're going to dry out the sponge and then you're going to rip it, right? And that's injury, that's illness, that's fatigue, extra fatigue, chronic overtraining, which is very hard to get to, but people
Yeah.
do. And so my thing is like, like we got to squeeze the sponge and then like there's days like we don't have to let go of it all the
Mhm.
time. We just let go a little bit. So that's an aerobic ride, right? So you let go of squeezing the sponge, what happens? We absorb more water, right?
Right.
When we absorb more water, then we can squeeze the sponge harder, right? So I look at this in like a micro, like a week, like, where are we letting go of this, letting go of our grip, and then one day a week where we just don't do anything, right?
Yeah.
And I get a lot of friction early on. I call it the freakout zone. I tell people you're in the freakout zone. We're 6 to 8 weeks in. You thought coach was going to kick your butt, and all I'm doing is pulling you back.
Mhm.
And but they're like, I feel great. I'm training more days. I have better quality, but I can do more. I'm used to
I
doing
know.
more. I'm like, well, if I'm used to drinking it every night, it doesn't mean it's a good thing. Like,
Right.
like just because something's right. And so, and they understand it now because they come from the newsletter. They come, see some of my stuff on Instagram and whatnot. But you have to let go. And then I do it in a 3 week block, right? So like week one is a new concept. Week two is a little bit more volume. Week three, we pull back a little bit, right? So that we're, notching our way up. And then after a big event, I pull people back for like a
Yeah.
month, right? Because again, a big event like a marathon, a long Grand Fondo, a bike packing trip, these are big squeezes, right? Big
Mhm.
squeezes on the sponge. Yes, it's a race, but it's also a stimulus. It's like the most magnificent hard workout you possibly could do. And if you look at in Training Peaks or anything and see how strenuous it was, those are your bigger peaks. Well, it's if I'm going to recover off like VO2 max, a power zone, or a quarter repeats, you better be sure we're recovering after a big event. And people are like, I feel clunky, I don't feel good. My friends are getting back into it. Just because your friend is doing it doesn't, if they're jumping off a bridge, you shouldn't be jumping off a bridge,
Right.
right? And it's all this friction that comes up, and it's not bad friction. It's just like a lack of education, unfortunately maladaptive confirmation bias of like, well, I used to do that, right? And think
Right.
of any skill set we've ever had, any quality in our life, like what got you there doesn't keep you there.
Yeah.
From losing weight to getting fit to doing a new job to just getting like you have to.
Maintenance is hard.
Oh, it's the hardest thing. And I'll say this is one of the, people say, well, it's boring.
Yeah.
Zone 2 ride is boring. Zone 2 run is boring, or easy run, whatever, or aerobic, right? Whatever you want to call it,
Mhm.
And I'm like, well, the person who codes for a living, like, is it boring writing code?
Right.
Like the person who, Tiger Woods chipping golf balls. Is that boring? Right?
Yeah.
Steph Curry shooting free throws or 3 points. Is that boring? Right? Serena practicing her serve. Is that boring? Right? Like the people who are successful in any career, they do the basics really well. Whether they had to work hard to get there or just innately they did that. They do the basics better than anyone. And oftentimes, particularly in sport, they aren't afraid to come back to the basics at the beginning of the season when they're in a hitting slump. Whatever it
Mhm.
is, let's come back to the basics. And to me, it's like aerobic is like chicken soup for the endurance athlete,
Yeah.
right? Right? Like it's like hey, we're overcooked or life is crazy. let's come back to the basics,
Mhm.
aerobic, right? I'll give you some intensity, we'll sprinkle it in a little bit, right? But your body cannot absorb it. And that's all we're
Right.
trying to do is like just notice what you can absorb, right? And absorbing things is like, do you feel good? Each week are you getting better, right? Like, do you feel like you can sustain things more? Can you do more reps? Can you go further in the same effort? Like, these are the absorption things because we think stimulate, adapt. Everyone does, right? Stimulate
No.
the organism, adapt. We stimulate, adapt. Okay, I adapted. I feel like I'm not sore anymore, so I stimulate. And I always tell people it's stimulate, adapt, and then and I'm starting to hear this like it's coming out in like some research and stuff. And not that I'm ahead of the game, uh, it's just like, okay, what about then stabilizing that adaptation and then actualizing the performance benefit, right?
Mhm.
That's the conversation I'm having with a lot of my clients right now. Is like, and it's been 3 years, 2 years, and they're like, you know what? Like, should I enter in all these events because
Yeah.
I don't need to, right?
Right.
Because like I was having this conversation this week, and a client's like, I don't need to do this thing. I want to do it, and that's such a
Yeah.
different. I said, wow, now you're coming from a place of confidence versus insecurity. And
Mhm.
people who are not taking easy days, I will 100% look you in the eyes and look yourself in the mirror. And I can guarantee you that there's a hint of insecurity there, that you're not good enough, or you're not capable enough, or my body used to be able to do this and now it
Yeah.
can't, and you're comparing to something external. Even if it's your former self, it's not you where you're at. And if you can
Mhm.
accept where you're at, then you can be work on being consistent, and consistency leads to confidence. And when you're
Right.
confident, you don't have to go chase that person down in the park who passed you. And guys, we
Guilty
gotta
from
stop.
time to time.
Guys, we gotta stop passing women, and trying to like not let them beat us. Like my
Right.
women are like, this guy just kept trying to pass, like
I
whatever.
got
Or he was,
chipped.
yeah, he's riding on my wheel, like or he was
Yeah.
drafting me and then sprinting up the hill, whatever it is. I'm joking, but it's
No,
just
you're not.
consistency thing is well, yeah. I've always been a slow runner, a rider. Like on my easy, like
Yeah.
hard days are hard and easy days are easy.
Right.
And I'm now the salty old dog on the road group who is yelling at the young kids, like, "What are you doing?" Like I
Yeah.
literally lit up a friend, like a younger guy that worked at the bike shop because like we go to a hill, they attack it. Okay, I'll catch him at the hill. It blew up the whole group. And
Yep.
then we get to the hill and then it keeps going. I'm like, okay, maybe they'll be at the T of the road. They're not there. I'm like, it was like 20 minutes and they're sitting there like, and I'm like, what are you doing? Like
Mhm.
we chose to do a group ride with a mixed ability for 70 miles and we're 10 miles in and you're
And you
blowing the
dropped
group to
everybody.
pieces.
Yeah.
Like, like come on. And I got on them because I got yelled at when
Yeah.
when I was younger back in my day. But anyway, so consistency
Yeah.
is what kills, and trying to get people to understand is like, oh, they misconstrue consistency for I have to train every day. And
Yeah.
I'm like, sometimes to be consistent, you have to back off a day or back off a session so that you can stabilize where your training is at. So then, because you don't know when you're going to really make the big jump, right?
Right.
And so and it's the hardest thing for people to see because the feedback loop is so long. I was listening to
Mhm.
Mark Zuckerberg talk about something, and he was talking about jujitsu, and like, and they were joking, and he's like, it's like it's the person was like, oh, it must be like like in business, they're not trying to choke you out. And he's like, well, no, they are, but it's over a longer period of time, right?
Right.
And he's like, the thing about jujitsu, and I paused it because after he says this, it's like, it's a quick feedback loop, right?
Mhm.
Like you get instant information if you're doing it wrong or right. And I started thinking, I paused it and I started thinking, this was just yesterday, I was thinking about feedback loops. And it's like, to be an endurance athlete is the feedback loop is like so long, whether you're doing the right stuff
Years.
or wrong stuff,
Yeah.
years. Like I tell clients, they're like, when is this going to get easier? I'm like, well, like 18 months, like we'll start
Yeah.
noticing aerobic, like where you feel differently. And they're like, I
Right.
don't want to wait that long. And it's like, well, then sign up for a different, I joke with them,
Yeah.
but find
No.
something else because this is not for the weak of heart. This is not
No.
for people without grit or perseverance. Like this is
And there's
why,
no quick fix. Although a lot of athletes, when they first start a
Yeah.
sport, they see huge improvement. And so they think, okay, I'm just going to keep improving and improving. And no, the more I do the thing, the less the improvement is.
Yeah.
But it's fine tuning everything. And you have
Absolutely.
to be patient. And I
Yeah.
think that's an important concept in our coaching relationships too. I've had folks say to me, oh, can you coach me for the next 8 weeks? I have this event coming up. I'm like, I barely know you in 8 weeks.
Yeah.
Coaching is not about, just I can write you a program, but that's
Yeah.
not coaching.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
That's a tough
so
spot. That's really a tough spot when
it
people
is.
come in and it's like, hey, I got 6 weeks to something and I need you to,
Yeah.
and I tell people is like, I'm like, look, like I'll get you there, but I'm not going to do anything at the detriment of we can do things that like get you there in 6 to 8 weeks that are not good for long term development, and I will not do
Mhm.
those things
Yeah.
because it's going to only confirm the bad things that or the get you into sticky situations down the road that I'm trying to detrain and re-educate people on how to get them away from that. And it's just being transparent with that. It's like,
Mhm.
it takes and I it takes a while to get to know someone. It takes like are you being honest? Are you not? Are you committed? Or like are you having a tough time? Does your schedule allow it? Like some people like I can train 2 hours a day and I'm like, you're getting 5 hours of sleep. Like, no,
Yeah.
you can't. You
Yeah.
did, but you can't, right?
Right.
So, um, yeah, the feedback loops are just much longer. And so it's like, you got to find joy in the boring. You have to find
Yeah.
joy in the mundane. You have to find joy in just getting out there and doing stuff. And this is why, like, I think good coaches worth their salt will really educate people on the process and like
Mhm.
why are you doing this session, right? And so but I'll tell you, is even telling explaining why 17 times, eventually sometimes I have to be like, okay, you're like, it's a philosophical, like you're gonna have to like you got to do it, like you got to go
Mhm.
slower. And the irony is every time I've pulled someone back, they've always gotten better,
Yeah.
always. And it's
I
like
often
counterintuitive.
tell people when I started running, I ran too hard all the time. I was like running as hard as I could, but not really as hard as I could and never easy.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I finally learned to run easy, which I found really hard. I had every excuse in the book.
Yeah.
Oh, my biomechanics suffer. I'm going to
I
get
get
injured,
that. I
blah,
feel
blah, blah.
clunky. It feels
I know.
harder. And I'm like,
Yeah. But you know what I did, Justin? I started training with power. I
yeah,
had Stride, and I hired Steve Palladino as my coach, and of course he'll come right down on you if you do
yeah,
the wrong things.
yeah,
And once I started running slower, I
yeah,
started winning races. It was like, okay, what is the difference? I was training less
yeah.
intensity,
Yeah.
but yeah, and
This
then
is
I
what
got
I
faster.
call it. This is what I said. Like I gave this analogy the other day because I was trying to get through to a couple of my clients that, and we talk. You have the same conversation. I'm like, okay, what metaphor is landing? And the big thing is like, how do I say it? Like there's a difference between training with like the concept of like you're using a credit card or like you're using your debit card. All right. So if you're training with your credit card, uh, the concept is like, like it's easy to overspend if you're
Hmm.
not disciplined, right? And the thing is then if we don't unload or like absorb like have days where we're spending less, if we're overspending our budget, then we have to like correct the other way, but we
Right.
don't, right? So we keep spending, we get to the end of the month and we don't pay it in full. You don't recover enough. And to me the interest rate, and the balance is fatigue, right?
Hmm.
And so then if you don't pay the piper,
Yeah.
the interest and everything carries on. Whereas if people, I'm not saying what you should do, financially. It's not financial advice, not a
It's not a
financial
good
advisor,
financial
but
advice.
but 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 when you spend with your debit card, right? Like you have the money and it's like that's my money, right? And to me,
Hmm.
it's almost like endurance training is really like saving for retirement. If you dollar cost average, right? Like no matter when I get paid, I always put $50 into this account, right? And well, if you're buying stocks or whatever you're buying, like some days it's up and you're getting few shares, not as
Right.
many. And some days it's down and you're getting more. So training is like some days you're going to feel good. You're going to buy some more shares today. You can't be greedy. You got to spend the same amount, but you're going to feel better and you're going to get more out of it. And then
Hmm.
the key thing is the days that it you're not getting as many shares, the dollar's not going so far that day, is to not, you can still do the training, you can still do it, but you can't be stubborn and try to overspend on that day. And a
Right.
lot of people overspend on that day because I got to get this distance in this amount of time. That's what I always do. Or I
Mm.
always like average this heart rate, and I got to get this. Or I saw the leaderboard and I wanted to get up there. And it's like, okay, that's fine one time. But if it's like your default,
Yeah.
right? If the factory settings are you're always making that decision, then you're going to have a tough time in this, right? And so,
Mhm.
yeah. So my thing is like trying to get people to try to understand where the pieces of the puzzle really fit, and because it's not just about easy training, like all the time. It's like, again, to me, hard workouts are a reward, not a right.
Yeah.
Right? Like you really have to show me that you can execute it without going over. And I tell people it's a trust thing. Once I trust you, then you'll get a little bit more leashed for some of the harder things that become much more challenging to execute, right?
Mhm.
Um, and threshold is always the one that gets.
Yeah.
It's just
Well,
so approachable to go faster, right? If you're at VO2 max and going hard, you don't have that much room to go. It's hard as hard,
right.
so we're going right. But threshold is like steady, and it's like I can go faster. And I tell people this is where I'm at, like non-negotiable. Do not go
Mhm.
faster because it's too precarious to know, like you're more than likely to go over the zone, and then we're not doing the work in this area, and we're in kind of a gray area. So my thing is, trying to educate people. Look, I'd rather you go for a longer interval or shorten the rest, but not go faster. Well,
Yeah.
I ran faster, or I did better, so then I have a higher FTP, and therefore I should go harder. And I'm like, it's not as dynamic as people think it is. Like my
Right.
threshold stuff I mean, when I was really training in high school and college and post collegiately, like my threshold pace for running was, and heart rate on the bike was, it's about the
Pretty
same for
consistent. Yeah.
a decade,
Yeah.
and it's not as dynamic as people think. But the watches tell us, oh, you've gotten better, or now you're detraining and going backwards. And it's like, how many people adjust their FTP after a long hiatus off the bike?
Right. I did.
Yeah,
'Cause I
me
took 2
too.
months where I was running and
Yeah,
lifting, and I came
yeah,
back and I was like,
yeah. But this is
"This
why
is
you're a coach,
ridiculous."
Lori.
I had just finished I know. I had just finished racing nationals. It was my peak of the year, and it was like, "There's no way I'm near that threshold." And I took it down, and I haven't retested 'cause
Yeah,
well, whatever. I have a good sense of where I am, and I've gradually brought it back up, and
yeah,
I'm getting close to where I was, but I'm still not there. That's gonna be
yeah.
months down the line,
I
and
know,
that's
but
okay
yeah,
'cause
it's
I'm doing what
timelines.
my body needs right now.
Exactly, and it's also timelines, right?
Yeah.
There's this sense. It's like, okay, if we have a little bit of shorter timeline, like it's like, okay, like we'll get there, right? So maybe we
Yeah.
got to move a few dials up. But I always tell people, it's like, why are we on the short timeline? Like,
Mhm.
like you selected this thing kind of because you just either want to, and I'm not talking about national, like things in a calendar that are preset. It's like, well, I want to do this race, and it's like, well,
Yeah.
is there another race, or is there another opportunity out that's not going to create so much pressure? And if there's
Mhm.
not, that's okay. Then we're like, hey, there's pros and cons, like there's choices we're going to have to make. We can't do everything, but if we spread things out, then we have more of a runway to land this plane, and therefore a little less pressure. So some people can handle the pressure and deal with it. Some people think they can, and it's not great for them. So it's just like, to me, like coaching and is really about like existing. Like you have to understand the dichotomies that, like the forces that are pulling you in different directions, right? Like as a
Mhm.
coach with athletes, right? Because it's like, like someone, you can find someone that says like only this stuff, and it's
Right.
like, yeah, okay, like that works good for these people or in these scenarios. And then there's people only this
Or it
stuff.
might work good for this short period of time, but
Yeah.
not long
Cool.
term. Yeah.
Like block periodization versus parallel periodization,
Right.
right? Block periodization works really good for, beginners learning a skill. Hey, for a long time, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. But we miss out on some qualities, and it takes a while to develop them. Like speed takes forever to develop. It's the first to disappear, right? So like I personally work more in parallel periodization. Everything's done at the same time, but it's like some things might be like just one workout every couple of weeks just to get like whatever it is, right? So it's
Mhm.
just kind of understanding, right? Understanding these things, and I try to explain to my clients the best I can in ways that they'll understand, and give analogies to get to know them. So if they're
Right.
in medicine, okay, I'll give medicine analogies. If they're in finance, I'll try, just something that'll land for them, because I think our job is to make sure people understand it. And I think sometimes, I'll say sometimes, I usually use big words like all the time, but I'll say sometimes people get really attached to the people who like recite research,
Hmm.
right? And because they look like they're smart, right? Or they
Right.
sound like they're smart. And I'm like, again, it doesn't mean they're the best coach, because, and it's a little bit why like I put the art of training on my newsletter, because it's like, I believe you have to understand the science in order to understand the art of it. Like, how do those pieces get put together? And as you know, most of us coaches know, the science is always like 5 to 15 years past, behind what the lead practitioners are doing and stuff. Um, but it's, yeah, no, it's really interesting. There's so many things to talk about,
I know, and we're at an hour, so I think
Oh,
we
okay.
have to say our
Yeah.
goodbyes. Um, Oliver, I have a bunch of questions. I'm going to send them to Justin. I can answer one for you, but I'll send them to Justin, and hopefully he'll
Okay.
be nice and answer them for us, and I'll post
Yeah.
them up for you.
Yes.
We are going into our cutback week, so
Okay.
all of this, I think, has led us to hopefully have a greater appreciation for rest and recovery. And super important, don't overdo it. Don't add a lot in. You need to let it absorb now. That's what makes us stronger. That's what makes us faster. So, what else did I want to mention? Oh yeah, Pelafondo this weekend. Maggie's on the call. The team is set up. So we have, as of today, this is pretty exciting. So Maggie's organizing a team. The second time she's organized a team for us. We've got 44 athletes pledging 2453 miles. So I hope you got some good chamois cream and have a good weekend and post up as we're going. Thanks to Jim, he set up, spins a lot. Jim spins a lot. Set up a Pelafondo stacks, I think, 2 different days in Domestiq. So take a look at that. And there's a chat on Facebook. So if you're not in the Pelafondo chat, join in and join in the fun. You can still sign up during the event. So if you decide you want to do a little Pelafondoing, go ahead and sign up. Reach out to Maggie or join the chat and she'll send you the code. And nothing awesome to say about next week. It's a lot of endurance, and that's good. That's exactly what you need. Try not to overdo everything. And I think that's about it, because we're an hour and 2 minutes in. You talk more than Brian does. It's good though.
Sorry.
So many good pieces here. There's a transcript available. We found last week. Someone had asked us for a transcript. So if you want to read this conversation, lots of good nuggets in there. So Justin, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Lori. Appreciate it.
This was awesome. We'll see y'all on the leaderboard.
All right. Later,
Have a
everyone.
good week, everybody. Bye
All right.
bye.